have you had a medical diagnosis? And I'll put that to you first, Shaun. Have you had a medical diagnosis of a mental health condition? And if you could basically talk us through that, if you have.
Yeah, I was diagnosed, I think it was the year before last, with anxiety and mild depression. And at that time, there was a lot coming at me at once. And, I've been through tough times before, so I thought I was ready for everything. And I was doing my best to try and cope. I couldn't. It was affecting me mentally and physically. And it didn't get any better even after I was diagnosed, because things just got increasingly harder for me in terms of what was coming my way. But prior to that, people talk about mental health, and it didn't mean anything to me. I really couldn't sort of comprehend where they were coming from. So it has been a real eye opener for me. But out of something negative, or the experience, a lot of good's come out of it, because I've been able to really find myself and find the real Shaun. And it's strange because I feel like I've been locked away for the past 45 years, and have had no voice. But now I'm sort of trying to make up for it. Yeah, I mean, that particular year, I lost my father-in-law. So my partner was grieving, so I had to cope with that. My own father suffered a stroke, and that put a lot of pressure on me as the eldest to have to sort of step up and take over his care and everything, all the decision making. It was just a horrific year. And I had issues at work on top of that, which I think it was the issues at work that really triggered me going to see my GP. And it really didn't hit me as to how much I was going through until I sort of broke down in front of my GP. It was he was really the person that sort of opened my eyes to the fact that I was going through something, and it was okay to admit I was going through something, and it was okay to ask for help. They offered me counselling, they offered me medication, and I was very resistant to that because I had that old school mentality. Like my parents were like, when it comes to going to see a counsellor, only sort of crazy people go see the counsellors, and all these myths. But actually, it couldn't have been more wrong. So yeah, it was really my. Probably, it was actually my colleagues at work, my close colleagues, that sort of really could see I was going through something, and signposted me to the best place to go, and they were really good listeners as well. They, the fact that they couldn't probably empathize with what I was going through didn't take away from the fact that they could recognize that I was in pain. It was a case of, Shaun, we're signing you off sick. Go see your GP. And and from when you go down that road, you have to do everything you can to help yourself, especially if you want to stay in your job. And and I wanted to get better. I was determined to get better because, and I was desperate to get better, and so therefore I was willing to do everything that it took to get me back on track and firing on all cylinders. Not just for me, but because I'm a team player as well, and because I wanted to be there for my colleagues as well as my family, and I knew I wasn't in a fit state to do that because there's not really much error for mistake. There's not really much space for error in my line of work. So, I had to be on point.
Yeah. Okay. And Chris, could you share a bit of your experience in terms of the first question? So, what was your journey to receiving a medical diagnosis?
In my career, in my last career, I actually had two diagnoses. First one, a few years back when I was in leadership, was stress, where I was signed off for stress for a short period of time. And the second one was just before I left the company, which was sort of depression, like mild depression. And similar to what Shaun said, one of the first solutions, and I'm not sure if it was because I already had preconceptions of the GPs, but the second they started mentioning antidepressants, I was immediately sort of against it. I didn't feel that they actually were listening. I didn't feel that they actually could relate. I didn't feel that antidepressants would have been the ultimate solution. And I've known and coached and mentored people who have been on depressants myself, and I've seen how it can have sort of side effects. As well as it does support some people, it does work. I'm not completely anti it, but for me personally, I was more interested. It motivated me to look more into sort of natural remedies and natural healing solutions like ashwagandha, stuff I've mentioned before, ashwagandha, Irish moss, shilajit, like different sort of natural substances that I could get access to, and help to sort of heal on my journey. Mine was triggered, I would say, by me trying to balance and projecting a lot of my own expectations into what I would call a reality, my reality at the time. I was doing a respectable job, working for a respectable company, respectable salary, sort of all the sort of expectations that I would have of a young Black Nigerian in Britain, kind of thing. So I took a lot of projections that I'd sort of built up over the years, of the reputation I expected to be, the man, so-called man I expected to be, and they all start to sort of pressurize me. And then that faced with all the other stuff at work, even though it did have so many fantastic benefits from it. Like I said on the last interview, there were still the underlying issues of sort of institutional racism, stigmas that we also microaggressions that we go through at work. Just the little things that sort of add up over the years. And I was in the company for at least 15 years, moving from department to department, experiencing the same sort of glass ceiling approach. In some cases, isolation, because I don't conform with some of the things like cigarette breaks and, not going out for drinks after work, and rather wanting to sort of go home and train or go home and sort of pick up the family. So there was a lot of cases where I felt my growth was stunted. Even getting into the positions that I was in, I was always a sort of niche. In a leadership team, I was a niche. There was not that many other people that represented myself. So when I had certain challenges, that obstacles I was facing, people would generally listen to me, but not really able to hear or relate, or, like Shaun said before, empathize. There were a few good allies that I had working in that sort of environment. But unfortunately, as it is with humanity, sometimes it's easier to just look away because everybody's in fear of jeopardizing their own position if they do intervene. It's the exact same scenario that you see with the sort of George Floyd and all of the allied police officers, that police officer who murdered him, were stood there watching, and out of fear, instead of doing the normal human thing to do, which is go and stop him and stop that officer from killing George Floyd, they in fact helped. They antagonized the community. They did what they could to defend the badge that they call it, to defend the blue. And it's a similar thing in the industries that we work in when we don't have allies and people who look away, who are aware of what's going on. And for the sake of their own, saving their own bacon, or for the sake of saving their own careers and saving their own privilege, absolutely. There's a massive fear. I think that's another thing that's not really addressed. There's a massive fear that I think that other cultures actually have of the Black community, whereas if we do ask for let's just say reparations, for example, a lot of people, and if we do ask for equality, a lot of people may have to lose their privilege, because in order to equal out the balance, we're talking about years, like ancestral generations of inheritance that had been illegal inheritance, that a lot of people are able to live the sort of lifestyles that they live today. And once again, working in the corporate industry, I was working in finance as well. So I was actually, there was a stage where I was managing accounts, like high net worth accounts of senior stakeholders, and just seeing the sort of wealth and lifestyles that people were living and being aware of that, and seeing the sort of privilege problems that they'll come in, and their biggest problem was the renovations that they were doing on one of their estates. The builders couldn't come through because somebody broke their arm, so the renovation's now going to have to get pushed over. And hearing that sort of thing at that stage of my life, and then coming back into my community, and people are struggling to keep the roof over their heads. People are worried about keeping their jobs, literally keeping their jobs, because they may say the wrong thing at work, they may wear their hair in the wrong style. And that alone, just coming into work, being yourself, being you in your own skin, saying your name with pride, talking about the food that you eat, talking about the conversation you have at the dinner table, could sort of get you alienated. So just I always had a conflict at work in sort of losing my own identity, and eventually conforming just to try and get a promotion, or just to try and sometimes even stay in the role that I was. So those were some of the sort of challenges that I took on board. And that also has a ripple effect on your personal life, because me losing my identity at work, looking in a mirror, not knowing who I am, not knowing what my actual purpose is, what my actual values are, questioning my own worth and existence. And then coming home, and I've got my children, I've got my lady, and I'm blessed to have family around me as well. I've got my parents, my siblings, and all the stresses that I internalize at work. Even though it's not intentional, you come home, and sometimes those stresses do come out at home. Like, all it takes is for your partner or your loved one to say the wrong thing, or to not have even that, just the smallest thing. It could have been, I remember sort of losing my temper at the smallest thing. And being mindful that I'm a tall, athletic Black man, so always worried that, they're going to perceive me as aggressive. No matter what I do, it's going to be aggressive. Trying to internalize that as well, lowering my voice. I remember being at work and talking so quietly. It came to a point where I'll be in office meetings, and I would always have people saying, "Chris, can you talk up, please? Like, you talk really low." And it came to a point where I came to realization where I was consciously or unconsciously lowering my voice and talking almost like miles, because I didn't want to talk how I naturally talk, with a natural energy and hand gestures and everything else. Because it'd be like, "Oh, Chris, why are you?" You know,
the fear of being typecast.
Fear of being typecast, and having all of those sort of, once again, this microaggressions, the thing with the pay gap and everything else as well, and have to work 10 times harder to literally keep the same position as somebody who's new, and seeing people go along the career path much faster than yourself. People
it all comes at a psychological cost attached to all of that. So people
trained over the years who literally it's a lot faster, and literally asking me, "Chris, how come you're not you should be a sort of senior director by now, XYZ, who you've trained, who doesn't have half your competency."
is now directing 3 sort of, and literally smiling it off, putting the mask on to just sort of, you know how it is kind of thing.
But all the while chipping away at you. In quite a significant way, to the point where it led you to that place where you found yourself at a GP.
Absolutely.
So I think what I want to do, the reason why I asked the question about what the journey was like, I'd like to, without getting too personal, or at least getting as personal as you feel comfortable in doing, just to try and demystify that process for many men that may be going through this struggle of actually getting to the door of the GP and sitting down with the GP and just getting a feel for what that process is like.
As Chris has said, when it came to the antidepressants, for example, when they first suggested it to me, it was, it wasn't something I was even going to entertain at that point. And as far as counselling was concerned, again, it wasn't something I was ready to deal with. However, there came a point where I had to, I had to come to the antidepressants, and that helped. It really helped in terms of making me feel normal again, and taking away some of that fear that has built up your whole life. But the antidepressants don't work by themselves. The counselling plays an even bigger part in learning how to cope. I've been lucky. I've had my work provides counselling, and I have to say it was exceptionally good. And I've been away to what do you call it? Rehabilitation centres where they offer mental health counselling, and again, it was exceptional. And now I have made friends with a very prominent professor in the United States who gives me counselling, and she's a really good mentor for me, and she's been able to really fine-tune a lot of the issues I was still dealing with. For example, the triggers. Chris talked about the angry part, and it was, certain things would trigger me and bring out that anger. But I've through the counselling, I've now got past that, and it's just it was really difficult process, because everything that you believed or were brought up in life thinking flipped on its head. And so I had to learn all over again. And, the first thing I realized was people don't think the way you and I think. People think differently. And whether you agree with it or not, and I wasn't agreeing with it, and that's where some of the anger came in, you have to accept that people are at different stages. And you have to accept where they are, and sometimes you have to meet them where they are. So these are just some of the things I've learned. So yeah, it really has opened up my mind and my consciousness, and I'm now at the part where I'm actually enjoying the journey, because I feel stronger and a little bit wiser every day, and there's always something to learn. And I've always been an optimist, and as far as the whole experience is concerned, it was a horrible experience for me, but it's really shaped me into someone that I actually like now. But for so long, again, like Chris said, for so long, because you're trying to appease people and just have an easy life, you just accept things that aren't right, and you become that quiet person in the corner, and you don't speak your mind. In fact, you don't say anything sometimes. It's just easier. And it eats away at you. Whether you like it or not, it's going to eat away at you, and it's going to take away, and you lose yourself. So he gave me the choice of like the NHS offer counselling. It's over the telephone. So he gave me that choice. He told me about there's certain apps out there that can help you. And obviously there's crisis lines as well you can reach out to. And then obviously he told me about the medication, and he told me about a little bit about how the medication works. And it's not something you stay on, or you have to stay on. And it was perfectly normal. He made for people to take the medication. So, but I was lucky. I've got really good GP because he's a really caring GP, and he'll even like call when he hasn't heard from me in a while. He'll call up and say, "Shaun, I'm sure we're due an appointment. Come down and see me." So, I've been blessed in that way.
Okay. So, did you actually feel at that point then that you were heard? So
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And perhaps, and I'm just speculating here, perhaps my GP has been through something himself, so he can recognize what I was going through, because I certainly recognize it in people where I'm able to help them. So, I think that might have played a part.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'll be clear with the GP, I'm not. I went to my GP sort of as a last resort. One, because I'm more. I try and always be more sort of self-sufficient, and maybe that was one of my downfalls as well, that I was trying to internalize and trying to be the strong person. So it's something that I do balance with. Whereas I found more of my therapy and more of my healing within my martial arts training, within my family, communicating and talking to my partner, to my children and my parents and my network and my mentors. The GP experience, once again, I did find it, for me personally, and I'm actually quite... it's quite exciting to hear Shaun's experience, because a lot of people that I've spoken to have found help at the GP, but once again, almost they're sort of limited to a level where they can empathize. So I think you're really lucky to actually have found a GP who you've actually connected with so well, especially within our community. My personal experience did feel a bit more like a conveyor belt, where it literally was just like, okay, you're going through this. Let's sort of give you these, and there's these counselling, that kind of thing. And it may have been my own personal experience at the time, and the way I perceived I may have projected that experience because of what I was going through. Maybe I was being anxious, maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I premeditated what the conversation would be. When I heard certain trigger words, I was immediately opposed to it. So it's even a reflection that I have on myself. However, I did also have other influential sort of healing techniques, which, like I said, was yoga. I do yoga, I meditate. I started to increase my meditation, started increasing my yoga, started increasing the amount that I was doing my training, my martial arts and my fitness training, increasing the time that I spent with my family, my children, and my partner. And I also was running a business on the side of work, which was an additional stress, running a business with friends, with brothers, with actual black men as well, which was also another challenge. trying to run a business with other people within our community as well was also one of the pressure. So I sort of started to reduce a lot of the things and energy that I was putting into other things that I was trying to build my character with. So the GP, answer your question, the GP service itself.
The experience for you.
The experience for me, it wasn't what I felt I needed. But I do know a lot of people who have had successful experiences within there. But the feedback that I do have a lot of the time, especially when you get referred to sort of crisis centres or helplines or counselling services, is there is still a lack of representation within those services as well. And that, once again, next leads to a lack of empathy, lack of understanding. And some people sort of shed in even more and sometimes end up even worse off than they were beforehand.
And I think that's an important point to raise, because people have a higher instance of suicidal thoughts, but those who are more likely, have the propensity to actually commit the act are Black men. And I think a big part of that goes back to what you're saying, Chris, about perhaps at the point of accessing these services, not feeling as though they've been heard, or perhaps, the medication not necessarily being the solution in their case. So it's important to, view these things from a rounded position, and to look at alternative solutions. And I want to come back to that a bit later. But before I do, I wanted to ask for you both again, and I'll start with Chris first on this one. When you look back at where you were at that particular point in time, when you were experiencing your mental health challenges, illnesses, or however you wish to define them, if there was a way that you could actually capture or describe the way that you felt within yourself, how would you describe that? Because I think it's helpful to kind of get a bit of a sort of image or an understanding of what a poor mental health state looks like for you compared with a good mental health state, just so that people can maybe sort of draw parallels or maybe learn from that.
Absolutely, it's a great question. I can summarize it in words, to be fair. And when I think back about my character and the personality type that I was, apart from being sort of egotistical, there was a lot of things. Well, I acted out of ego for a lot of things. I was judgmental. I was short-tempered, aggressive, fearful, conflicted.
Wow.
Unsure. Just I would, even though a lot of people, the few people in my network who did find out that I had a breakdown, they actually did say that they could not tell that I was feeling insecure, because they see me as a really secure guy. But it was a catch-22 scenario, because that was part of the problem. Me trying to sort of, not saying I'm an alpha male, but me trying to forward into that characteristic of being a sort of strong chest. I'm the guy that's going to make it, the guy that's going to help our community and save our family. So that was the way that I was feeling at the time. Just so much uncertainty and purpose. And that's the way that I felt then, compared to now, being able to sort of make the majority of my decisions out of love. And there's just so much peace that I feel now, and I'm still on a journey of recovery, but I feel everybody goes through trauma. Everybody goes through all of the sort of trigger points of like anxiety, depression. We all go through it, a lot of mental health conditions. But a lot of us have been so conditioned to mask it and not recognize it and not see it as something that's acceptable or actually normal to go through. A lot of us don't even realize that we're just sort of getting on with our coping mechanisms, just little things that we do, whether it's a sip of alcohol or whether it's a little cut here or there, or just having outbursts or screaming into a pillow. There's a lot of things we don't realize that we're internalizing. So that was how I felt. Hopefully answering your question, those are some of the words that I used to describe how I felt, just lost and alone as well.
Do you think with that then, Chris, do you think your understanding of what Black masculinity means has also altered with that?
Big time. I think I've always questioned what being a man actually is. I'm blessed and grateful that I've I'm quite athletic. I'm naturally athletic. It's in my sort of DNA. And I've always grown up being sort of able and capable of, whether it's sports or whether it's even like art stuff. So I've always questioned, what is being a man, the guy that gets all the girls? Is it the guy that has the biggest car, the biggest house, the fancy clothes? Like, what is actually the Arnold? I grew up I'm a 90s baby. So I'm an 80s baby. So I grew up with the Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Stallones, all the sort of, all the action figures, like the Brad Pitts and George Clooney's, and even with those kind of things, there was so much, once again, lack of representation. So I always question is, if that's being a man, how on earth can I achieve that? How on earth can I be the blonde haired, the blue eyed? How on earth, like even I'm too dark to even qualify as good looking kind of things. I just question it once again. And I think what did help to balance that out is me understanding my ancestral values. So I'm very extremely blessed that I actually do have my parents who are, like, I'm first generation here. So I did have at least that level of grounding of where you're actually from. And a lot of people that I see suffering now have a massive disconnect of where they're actually from as well, especially within our community. I think there's a big inconsistency within our community. And when I say our community, I'm talking about Black community as a whole, because there's such division within our community, like from being African to Caribbean, then or other born, then being Igbo, Yoruba, that different tribes and the religion. There's so many different things that separate us as a whole community. And even within all of those, will come down to sort of being British born, 80s baby. I was blessed. On one hand, I saw my family members who they're entrepreneurial, like typical Nigerian sort of career paths that everybody took: neurosurgeons, doctors, lawyers, all of those kind of general roles to go to. But then I also saw the other side who didn't have role models and was street life and trying to build a sort of family environment on the road. And seeing both of them excelling in their own ways and applying similar values and similar mindsets on both aspects of the road life and sort of corporate life, but with a lack of actual role models in either or. There are role models in some of them, but even the role models, once again, is sort of gearing us to be, this is what a man is. If you're not a man, if you're not earning this amount of salary, then you're a failure kind of thing. So it's a catch-22 scenario. But then, like what Shaun said, the only representation you have on TV is criminals, you know, or not really, or criminals, or some of the stereotypical sort of roles that will be placed in. So there's a big lack of what we should do sort of as men, depending on your network. There are a lot of positives, and it's getting a lot better now, but it depends on your circumstance and the network that you're able to keep and the network that you choose sort of to have. And what value it adds to my family. I've got my children who, if I can't be a role model for my children, if I can't be a role model for myself, then how can I be one for my children? And that's one of my family. One of my purposes for doing what I do and having the courage to sort of push myself and exceed further than what we're told we can achieve.
Yeah.
And once again, being a man, there's an image of being a man, being strong. Don't cry. Don't show vulnerability. Don't show fear. Don't fail. Those are all things that sort of are crippling for us, especially once again as Black men who are apparently supposed to do 10 times better than any other sort of community, just to sort of scrape the sort of same pay packet. And it's all false. It's all a false illusion. You know, it's all a false illusion. And everything starts with love, whether you're male or female, everything. If it doesn't stem from love, then it's not pure. It's not for us. And that's why that's why I believe we feel so much conflict. We're being in environments that aren't designed for us, being in environments that don't align with our core value, which is signatured within our DNA. We know it instinctively. We know that's why we have so much conflict, sort of, within ourselves.
Before I get onto that, I just want to go on the back end of what Chris has said there about masculinity. Now, when I was growing up, there was a real lack of role models when I was growing up, Black role models. So it was very hard to see who I should be aspiring to be, or how I should conduct myself. And and when you're everything that you read in the magazines and on the news, none of it identifies with you. And the only time something you might see a person of color is when it's linked to criminality. So you think, oh, okay, that's all I can amount to be. So I think that's still the case. A lot of people young people read into that, and that's one of the things that needs to change. And it's something that has held me back, I think, in growing up, and achieving much more than I feel I should have, and filling my full potential. But going back to your question about how I felt, I can identify with everything that Chris has said in terms of how he felt at conflict with himself and everything else. For me, I felt I was constantly under attack. And my defenses had to be up all the time. And it's tiring when you have to operate in that way and second guess everything that's being said or what people are doing. And, perhaps there's a level of paranoia, but I don't think that played a part. I think I was just, I've always been very introvert in terms of my thinking, and able to read situations. And when you're reading situations and you're reading them correctly, as I did, it just makes you even more tentative and on guard. And it took a physical toll on me. I lost like 2 stone within a space of 6 to 8 weeks. And
pattern affected.
Pardon? Oh yeah, I couldn't sleep. People were talking to me. I couldn't hear them. I was just like in a daze sometimes. Always thinking, always strategizing. And
strategizing about what?
Strategizing about my situation at work, and who were my allies and who weren't, who was out to get me. It was awful.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
And now it's I'm still under attack, but I don't focus on them because I know that I'm doing everything correctly. I know that my conscience is clear, and I'm just focused on what I need to do and keeping my integrity. So, as far as I'm concerned, you can attack me as much as you want. I'm not going to retaliate because I'm not going to get caught up in that mess. And that's sort of how I keep my peace now. But it tormented me for several years or longer, living like that.
Throughout this time, throughout the time where you were experiencing the anxiety, the depression, would you, what kind of things were family and friends saying, that actually made you really take a long, hard look at yourself and, recognize that it was the right thing to do in terms of seeking that help? What can you remember anything that was said that was particularly illuminating that was, for you, very much a red flag to say, actually, I need to change this situation before it does, untold damage?
To be honest, my family really struggled to understand what I was going through, and it was my wife that really shielded me from their judgment, or and even those family members that said they understood, they didn't really understand. They just felt they were qualified to understand because they were nurses or they came from a medical background. So it's strange because me going through what I've gone through has actually educated them, and they understand things a lot better.
That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. But it was really, it's really my wife that she's she runs the house. She's the boss, so I answer to her. So I had to do what's best. It wasn't just about me; it was about my wife, the kids, and so you have to do what you have to do, whether you like it or not.
Sure. Chris, were there any sort of defining moments for you in terms of family and friends where you could sort of say, that there was a moment where this was said or this was done and it made me really have a long, hard look at myself?
Firstly, I would say, Shaun, you're a very, very intelligent man for saying that your lady's the head of the house. My lady's here as well. She knows she's the head of the house. Brownie points all over, but let's go get it out. But no, it's a great question. I think for me, there were a lot of moments over the past, I would say over the years, I had to look at a lot of my relationships that some were quite a few were deteriorating, and my relationships, even at the time, and the ones that have lasted through to now, I actually understand that a lot of them were actually toxic, and some of them didn't help, and some of them, in fact, people were going through their own mental health challenges, and I didn't realize that. Same as if you go to counselling and you have a counsellor, that counsellor, whatever information you've told them, they actually need to let that go as well. It's like an energy exchange. And I was actually, and to an extent still am, around a lot of people who were going through their own mental health challenges as well. And some of those relationships just weren't good sort of blends together. And there were times when I had to sort of question, this relationship's breaking down with this person, this with that person, and am I the common denominator within these breakdowns? And then I was having fallouts with my parents, which is a big that no in the sort of in a Nigerian community, or in any community, I should say. You shouldn't, you should have that element of respect, and that's the way that I wanted to be. So I was even conflicted within myself. I wasn't able to sort of get with my parents and my siblings. And then once again, like you said, everything sort of started to pile up, and similar to Shaun, I would say like my lady is my rock. She worked in care, ironically, herself before, and we've all, within our friends' circles and within our networks, we've all lost people to suicide. We've all had people who have gone through mental health challenges as well. And like Shaun said, I think maybe those experiences have helped to an extent and allowed us to sort of do things differently to what we're sort of raised and the way that we're sort of geared and conditioned to think of turning our noses up to it. When I did go to my lady first, and then my parents and my siblings afterwards, and I said to them that, look, this is what I'm going through, and I'm just struggling. I don't think I can continue the life that I'm living. And if it's a case of me not continuing that life that I'm living, if there's no other options, then I don't know if I want to still go on. And I'm blessed and so grateful that I was mentioning it the other day as well, Esther, that my family, from my lady to my children to my siblings, are my best friends. When I did tell them we're here for you, like whatever it is you need, like whatever time it is that you need, whatever support you need. My martial arts coach and my mentors I had, several of them, similar to what Shaun said as well, I do believe have gone through mental health breakdowns themselves. So they were like referring me to different crisis lines that they've used, different other social services organizations that they've used as well, and saying actually this could work, this might not work. I've tried these and they were helpful for this. So I'm blessed that I've got a network like that. But my biggest concern, which is why I've gone into the industry that I've gone into now, is there are a lot of people within our community that don't have the same access to those resources, don't have the awareness that those services are actually there, don't have the belief that they actually can work, and the understanding that it's not one shoe fits all.
Yeah.
Just somebody taking a pill or somebody doing fitness training or martial arts releasing endorphins or doesn't work for everybody. Somebody changing their diet doesn't work for everybody, and it's not just the one, and it's a general growing process as well. It's not something that you're going to click a finger and have a sort of ibuprofen and wake up the next morning feeling a bit better. So yeah, but my network, like I did say, was I'm only great. I can only be grateful for my network that I have.
And was there anything that, both of you, was there anything, at that time and when you were in that place, was there anything that anyone could have said that would have literally been a lifeline to you? Just looking back, do you think there's anything that you could have received at that time that could have been a lifeline or a strength or steered the course of things differently for you?
I don't believe so, because in order for that to happen, you've got to recognise you're going through something. And I didn't see that I was going through something. My body was even telling me I was going through something, and we were trying to figure out what it was. Is it this? Is it that? But it wasn't any of these things. I just didn't know I was going through something. I think it's important people... there's more awareness around what the warning signs look like, because for some people the warning signs come too late, and that's when you talk about suicide. For me, I was lucky, but as I said before, because my colleagues were the ones that picked up on the warning signs before I did.
Yeah. Do you remember what some of those warning signs were?
Yeah, it was just how I react to things.
Okay.
It was just my reaction. It could be aggressive. And I don't even know I'm being aggressive or I'm coming across aggressive. It's just because it's all pent up in here, it's coming out that way. I don't mean to be like that.
Yeah.
I think in terms of masculinity, I don't think that this problem is unique to Black people or our culture. I think when it comes to masculinity, I think there's issues right across the board in terms of how men feel they should behave, how they treat women, how they take on leadership, and I see it at work. There's a lot of male chauvinism that goes on because that's what they have learned from their father or the previous generation. I think it's doubly difficult for people from Black backgrounds because as I said before, because there is a real lack of role models, and also a lot of our parents they were working all the time, so there wasn't anyone really there to bring you up as such. So you end up, your family becomes your friends, and they become your role models, and and that's where you start getting led. If you've got the wrong friends, that's where you start getting led into trouble. Chris is right. Things have got better in terms of the generations, and the fact that we were born here, we have a different outlook on what a fatherhood perhaps looks like to the older generation. But I personally, I think being a man means showing your vulnerabilities, and there's no shame in that. And giving love, because that's something I never really received from my father, was, him being able to give me a hug or something like that, because it just wasn't how he was brought up. So it's important that we nurture our people, the generations to follow, and set an example on how men should behave, how we treat our women, and how we conduct ourselves.
I think the very last question that I have is just around what we feel needs to happen with the current mental health service provisions and landscape to really ensure that we reverse statistics. How do we look at the pathways to those service provisions, and what do they need to look like, I suppose, to help that process? I'm not saying that it's the panacea or the sort of silver bullet that will completely remedy that statistic, but it must in some way play a part. Chris was reflecting on his experiences with the GP and the lack of representation when it comes to mental health service provision. It's just to understand what you feel can be done. Also to understand more within that question about the alternative therapeutic approaches. So again, Chris, I'll start with you on that.
So in regards to the alternatives, going from there, mine is more geared around what I actively do myself. So I'm quite proactive as it is now. So I do a lot of things which I would consider as therapy. So like I said, I do martial arts. I do several different martial arts. I train my children as well. My lady trains. We do yoga. I meditate. There's a lot of actual activities that we do that I physically do, as well as sort of running different enterprises now as well.
Get into those things, just to give people an idea, because some people, I think everyone comes from very, very different backgrounds, and whilst it may not be the exact thing for them, just to get a sense of, how do you start to get into cycling? How do you get into martial arts?
I'll say it as many times because I do believe it. I'm blessed that I was very young. Our parents always took us out cycling. We had bikes from very young. We were always the kids that were we were the kids in class that had the bikes, and other kids be like, "Oh wow, brilliant!" Like, sort of come around, and so we were always cycling. And then when I started to go through a lot of my challenges, I sort of went back to my infancy, and I was like, "Oh, what did I used to do that I used to love as a child, that I could relate to as a child?" And cycling was one of them. And my children love cycling, skating. We do archery. We do archery, and my lady as well. So we've all got bikes, and we've all sort of go out and do like a range of things together. We park hunt. I can't think of what we don't. We go stargate. Is it stargazing? Is that the right word for it? Stargazing. So there's a lot of things that we literally just do, and it's killing. I don't like the word killing, but it's killing several birds at one stone, as well as it's sort of bringing peace and harmony and like enjoyment and joy with us as a family and bringing us closer together. It's also us spending more time sort of doing things together and finding each other, seeing our silly sides kind of thing, and being okay to be, like Shaun said, be vulnerable. But those are a lot of the alternatives that I personally found were more natural for me, more not me taking a pill or going to sit in a room and talk with strangers. I'm not saying that's not a bad thing, Because there's also the case of me having mentors. That's another thing I've always made sure I've had. I've always wanted to. If I'm the smartest guy in the room, I think there's a problem. That's the way I've always sort of been raised to believe. And I always like to have mentors that are exceeding sort of triple what I'm doing, and people that I can aspire to. And that's what I've had: life coaches, mental health coaches, martial arts coaches. So I always do refer to these guys, and a lot of those guys, like I said earlier, are women, have been through challenges, life experiences themselves, where they can actually relate and say, okay, look, you can try this. This might work for you, it might not. But are you willing to sort of give it a try and embrace the unknown? And that's exactly what my mindset is. I literally love to sort of embrace the unknown and not conform to any form of way, being, I've mentioned being Nigerian, being black, being a man, British, being whatever it is. There's like, reality is what we make it, you know?
Absolutely.
And my kids, I would say my kids and my lady are my biggest drug. Is that a good thing to say? My biggest healer.
In answer to your first question about the way forward on how we can change things, I think there needs to be a lot more education from an earlier age, because a lot of teenagers go through things, a lot of pressures. And one of the ways I'm able to help myself and help others, I work with a number of organizations that try and help with mental health. One of the organizations I work along with is the Ollie Foundation, which was set up by a group of parents that lost their kids through suicide. And one of the projects we've come up with is being able to train young people in helping, in counselling and helping people with mental health issues or whatever they're going through, with a view to, if they want to go on and progress that field or go on and counsel other people, they can. So it's we're trying to empower more young people in this field, so they can each teach and teach and pass it on. And I think that's perhaps the best way we can help each other, is through that education and spreading the word. For me, that's really how I kind of that's really how I've been able to get through what I've got through, is by helping other people. Yeah, and that's just one of the ways I've been able to do that. I have hobbies as well. I like to do DIY. I like to gardening. Anything that kind of just switches off my mind is very, very therapeutic for me. But when I'm not doing that, I like to pour my energy into just making sure that people don't go through what I went through, and that they get the right help.
Absolutely. Do you think there are any ways that we can actually, just on a very last note, to sort of incentivize our community to actually step forward and not have that fear of actually asking for help?
I think it's really important that our community step up, because as Chris pointed out earlier, everyone is going through trauma, especially our young black men and women. And you see this played out in the street, that by their behavior, by their interaction with police and everything else. They're crying out because, they've the stuff going on at home. Why are they not at home at 10 o'clock at night? What are they avoiding? So a lot of young people are being traumatized, and we need to step up and recognize that. And instead of putting them in crews or whatever, we as a community, we need to step up and look after these kids and provide mentorship. And even if it's not your kid, you know, we still need to step in there where we can and play our part, you know. So that's how we can help.
We always do run a risk once again within our community because of the oppressions and the challenges that we do face of trying to grow up too fast and trying to think about being a step ahead and trying to get into careers or positions because we're forced to do it, tick all the boxes and build a career. We literally shield ourselves and we lose a lot of our childhood. Michael Jackson's a prime example story of that. Like we literally are just to be the best, we lose our childhood. So I'm blessed that, I'll say it again, I'm blessed that I see my children, I look at my children, and it's just seeing them be themselves and see them. It's just a blessing to be able to look at them and see the joy and see the energy that they have and tap into that. And in regards to what you're saying about the education, I agree with Shaun, what you were saying about the youth and generally where we are, but I also think we need a massive re-education within our adults and within adults as well, and our seniors and the role models that we generally should have. Because our adults, you can only teach what you know, and it's not a discredit to anything that any of our parents or adults or older generations done, because they did the best of what they could with what they had and what they knew at the time. So I completely respect and I'm so grateful for what they had done, but at the same time, there's still a lot of changes and re-education that we need to do as parents, as mentors as well, so we can be those role models and we can teach those right lessons. There's no point in us upskilling our youth and our children who are only in schools or education centres or community centres, and then they go back to homes that have parents who are still in denial of the challenges they're going through because they're still in those stigmas and taboos and in that narrow mindset of I'm fine, everything's fine. You can't talk. Everything I do is a challenge kind of thing, because we hear it too much in our communities. That's that's living out of ego rather than living out of love, and we see it so much within our community, and it's a catch-22 scenario, so defeating. Who could you talk to if you can't talk to your own parents and you can't talk to your own family, out of fear that they're not going to want to hear you, out of fear of wanting to get external validation. So I think it's all around. We need to really change our own consciousness and our own love for self. It's a love for self. That's what I feel. The biggest change we need is massive, pure love for self.
Yeah, and work on our own self-development.
That's it. Self-value, self-worth.
Yeah. Powerful. Well, thank you both once again.